Thank you. Let me first correct, us as Africans, we like introducing ourselves as your father's son. So I am Makhatule Wanika Mandela's son. It will happen that my father is forgotten and my grandfather becomes the popular face. But then again, let me also correct the assertion that I'm a minister. I'm actually a member of parliament serving in the National Assembly since May 2009, and I'm serving in my third term now in the Portfolio Committee of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development as its chairperson. So that is who I am. Honorable Program Director, Friends of Al-Aqsa, exhibitors and visitors, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, may the peace and blessings of God Almighty be with you all. It gives me the greatest pleasure to be in your midst at this Palestine Expo. At the outset, allow me to applaud the work that has been done by the Friends of Al-Aqsa for an amazing accomplishment amidst immense pressure. This accolade they share with all the organizations, institutions, and individuals who had the courage of conviction to associate their brands with a cause that my grandfather, President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, described as, I quote, the greatest moral issue of our time, the struggle for Palestine. This afternoon, I would like to reflect on that and place it in the context of the Expo and the broader struggle for freedom of expression in the world today. Before I do that, allow me, Program Director, to say that it is always a special occasion for me to be in London to participate in revolutionary events such as this, as I cherish some beautiful memories from being in the streets of London with my mother, Nolusapo Mandela Perry, when we used to attend protests at Trafalgar Square in front of South Africa House here in London, and participating in the anti-apartheid mass demonstration. It made us appreciate the role of the international solidarity movement, who, without their support, we could have never realized our freedom that we enjoy today. It is therefore feels good to be in your midst as we fly the Palestinian flag high over the next 2 days and beyond. Comrades and friends, this is an amazing accomplishment, and I hope that we will be able to exceed the mark of 15,000 achieved at the inaugural Palestine Expo in 2017. What is remarkable about this event is that it's not just a political rally or mass demonstration. In our own struggle for freedom, we learned the lesson that the struggle must be waged on multiple fronts: cultural, academic, trade, political, diplomatic, sport, communication, but most of all, the battle of hearts and the battle of perception. This multi-pronged approach not only armed us with a greater diversity of tools of struggle, it also enabled us to attract a broader audience of support base that could constitute the basis for a popular struggle. The Palestine Expo must be congratulated on creating a unique experience which proudly celebrates the Palestinian arts, history, and culture, whilst fostering discussions and activism in the United Kingdom. Allow me to elaborate briefly on why this is such a critical front in the struggle for a free Palestine. We had first experience as an organization calling themselves UK Lawyers for Israel applied its best efforts to stymie this event or to downplay the support for BDS movement. Let me say it loud and clear, ladies and gentlemen, for all to hear. Next to the internal popular protest movement waged in the face of all odds by the brave and courageous children, women and men of occupied Palestine, BDS is the most painful thorn in the side of apartheid Israel. They cannot stomach its worldwide popular appeal and success, and will do all in their power and might to obstruct, hinder, or stand in the way of any forum that advances the principles that BDS stands for. I have news for them, though. There is nothing you can do to stop the tsunami of history. You may frustrate, obstruct, or obscure, but in the end, justice will prevail. In the 70s, 80s, and perhaps in the early 90s, we too engaged in political action for the liberation struggle in South Africa. Apartheid South Africa and its imperialist allies too underestimated the power of the people, but today we stand before you, free from centuries of colonialization and free from decades of apartheid brutality and discrimination. Today, South Africa is free. Tomorrow, Palestine will be free. This gathering right here reminds us of our date with history. My brothers and sisters, the Palestine Expo reminds us of the reality of a nation that has now withstood over 71 years of the Nakba. It reminds us of homes, farms, and villages that was once home to a vibrant community with a proud history, culture, language, and cuisine that has been usurped and occupied in gross violation of international law. 7 decades of ethnic cleansing and genocide perpetrated in the name of the myth of a land without people for a people without a land. Palestine Expo raises the bar of awareness and consciousness by combining the use of traditional forms of education with cutting-edge technology to raise awareness about Palestine. It brings people together to celebrate Palestine like never before. It holds the promise and the dream alive that one day we shall indeed celebrate a free Palestine. One day we shall celebrate in a free Jerusalem, the eternal capital of a Palestine state. Comrades and friends, I am often asked what is so important to us as South Africans about Palestine's struggle that Madiba declared during his visit in 1995 in Gaza. I quote, that our struggle is yet incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinian people, close quote. What does this really mean? In the darkest hour, program director of our struggle, when our leaders were incarcerated on Robben Island and others in jails of apartheid South Africa, whilst our comrades were driven into exile and internal rebellion was being crushed. It was the images of the brave and courageous young people of Palestine, armed with nothing but rocks and their bare hands, that inspired us. Those images found themselves in every street of the townships of South Africa, found themselves in every prison of South Africa, and found themselves right in the hands of my grandfather in Robben Island. He says those photos inspired them and ensured that they kept hope alive. When they themselves were under siege and attack, it was the leadership of the Palestinian struggle that provided home, training, and financial support to our struggle. Our freedom is interconnected with that of the Palestinian people because ours is a relationship forged in the heat of the struggle, and they were the strongest advocates of our freedom in every global forum where they raised their flag of our just struggle alongside with the struggle of the Palestinian people. There is another reality playing itself out today that ties our struggle by an umbilical cord. That reality is imperialism or neo-imperialism, offered as the deal of the century. I have no hesitation in calling it for what it is, the hoax of the century. I will come back to that in a moment. But first, allow me to remind you of what Malcolm X said just over half a century ago in an article called Zionist Logic, published in the Egyptian Gazette on the 17th of September 1964, just months before he was assassinated. In the article, Malcolm X notes the parallels between subjugation of Palestinians and Africans. He pointed out the strategic value of Israel to world imperialism, and says, I quote, "The ever-scheming European imperialist wisely placed Israel where she could geographically divide the Arab world, infiltrate and sow the seed of dissension among African leaders, and also divide the Africans against the Asians," close quote. Towards the end of that article, he says, and I quote, "The Israeli Zionists are convinced they have successfully camouflaged their new kind of colonialism. Their colonialism appears to be more benevolent, more philanthropic, a system with which they rule simply by getting their potential victims to accept their friendly offers of economic aid and other tempting gifts," close quote. Malcolm X was referring to the newly independent African nations whose economies were experiencing great difficulties and whom Israel was manipulating to seek legitimacy. So when the leader of the free world comes around offering a golden handshake and bearing the trump card, gifts which the Arab nations must pay themselves, we recognize the behavior and definitely smell a rat. They call it what you will, but the deal of the century is no deal for us and is only designed to fortify apartheid Israel, legitimize its illegal settlements, and forever forge the right of return of 6 million Palestinians living in exile. This hoax of the century has served to unite the voice of the Palestinian people in opposition to it, but we must caution against the guile of imperialism. My brothers and sisters, we are very clear about why we call this the hoax of the century. There are indeed those who say we should wait and at least see what the deal is put on the table. Their reality stares us in the face. Trump has never been a friend of the Palestinian people, and he will never act in our best interest. He is not even a friend of America and does not act in the best interests of America. Since coming into power, he has cut developmental aid to Palestinian refugees and literally severed the pipeline that provides hope and much-needed medical care for children, some as young as 1 or 2 years old. He has defied international law and disregarded the global outcry against his announcement of moving the American embassy to Jerusalem. Historically, the United States of America has proven that it is not a fair and honest broker of peace in Palestine or anywhere in the world. We as South Africans know that because President Ronald Reagan's administration was on the wrong side of history and sided with a brutal, oppressive regime of South Africa. Nor will the USA ever recognize the view that the cause of the conflict dates back to 1948 with the creation of Israel, rather than Israelis' views of 1967 being the crucial point and the return of occupied territories being central to peace negotiations, and that the conflict has been a fight to bring home refugees to an occupied Palestine state. Those selling the hoax of the century must be told in no uncertain terms that the freedom of the Palestinian people is not for sale. Through decades of struggle, they have rejected all attempts of co-option and have persisted with the just moral stand that they have the victims of a process that they did not design, nor did they approve of it, nor will they ever approve of it. Even the good faith demonstrated by the Palestinians in the peace process has been betrayed by continued land grabs, expansion of illegal settlements, and obstinate refusal to right of return for all refugees. Comrades and friends, South Africans unashamedly demanded the right to self-determination and brought the brutal apartheid regime of South Africa to its knees. Palestinians have earned the right to self-determination under international law and innumerable UN resolutions. This is a right that nobody could deny us. And I dare say, nobody has the right to deny the Palestinians the right to self-determination. South Africa's history since 1652 is a history of colonization and systematic dispossession. This South African Native Land Act of 1913 overnight rendered blacks foreigners in the land of their birth and forced them onto 7% of the land. This was extended to 13% by 1936. Families and entire traditional communities were robbed of their homes, farms, and their land. Their crops, cattle, and possession were either disseminated or they had to be packed whatever they could onto ox wagons and head off to homeland reserves. Bantustans were created to move the majority of black South Africans to urban centers. Now, I come from such an environment. I grew up in the former Transkei, which was a Bantustan, a homeland reserve to hold blacks in a confined space. We were reduced as the vast majority of South Africans to only a 13% of the land, whilst 13% of white South Africans enjoyed the vast majority of the land at 87%. We fought for a one South Africa and fought for our liberation. Bantustans, homeland reserves never worked for South Africa. They will never work for Palestine. In those words, we continue to call for a one-state solution. I thank you.